Make sure. Perfect. Okay, welcome everybody to our Remembrance Month virtual lecture series. This is the third lecture that we've had this month. So my name is Meredith Patterson. I'm going to be the facilitator of this presentation. If you have any questions or anything like that, you can feel free to use, there's the raise hand at the top of the screen. You can use that. We have the chat feature as well. We do ask, oh, did you have a question already, Dan?
Sorry, it's just I've got nothing but a blank screen.
I'm going to try to. Do you see something now?
Yeah,
okay,
I now see both of you. Thank you.
Perfect. Great. No, I appreciate you letting me know. That's awesome. So yes. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to use the chat feature or raise your hand. I do ask that we try to hold our questions to the end, unless it is a technical issue. That is because we do have a kind of a Q&A at the end, so you'll be able to ask Brad any questions that you have then. This presentation typically would take approximately 45 minutes. It might go a little bit over, and then we'll leave a brief moment at the end for the question and answer period. So we're just going to kind of head into the presentation. So I'm going to present our lecture. So Brad was born in Listowel, Ontario. He earned his B.A. honors at Queen's University. From there, he went on to obtain a master's degree at Dalhousie University in Halifax, returning to Queen's to complete his doctoral studies. Brad holds a Ph.D. in Canadian history. He is a past president of the Ontario Historical Society and a member of the editorial board of Ontario History. He's a former vice chair of the Barrie Bell Restoration Committee, and he is also a past chair of both the Barrie Public Library Board and the Heritage Barrie, as well as past president of the Simcoe County Historical Association. He is the principal in DBS Heritage Consulting and Communications, and in May of 1998, DBS published Simcoe County Book of Days. His second book, Streetwise and Barrie, a historical guide to Barrie Street Names, was published in December of 2001. Brad's third book, in association with Sue Murdoch and Kurt Harding Sheik, is Beautiful Barrie, the City and Its People, and this illustrated history was published in October of 2005. It received the Ontario Historical Society's 2006 Fred Landon Award for the best book on regional history in Ontario, published in the previous 3 years. His fourth book is Playing Through, the History of Barrie Country Club from 1913 to 2013, and it was published in 2013. Now Brad is currently transcribing and editing the letters written home during the First World War, published in Barrie newspapers. And that's exactly what this presentation is about. So I'm going to pass it on over to you, Brad.
Thank you, Meredith. Good morning, everyone. Much has been written of late of the importance of letter writing during World War I. Some have gone so far as describing their place as essential. It is estimated that the war generated 2 billion pieces of mail. In the French army alone, 4 million letters and cards were sent from the rear to the front each day, and a further 1.8 million were sent from the front to the rear. Canadians, too, were prolific letter writers. To date, there has been no in-depth study of these contemporaneously published letters on a community-wide basis. More than 2,600 war letters were published in Barrie's 2 newspapers during the war. Despite state and self-censorship, these letters are invaluable in attempting to understand the impact of the war on individuals, on families, and on communities. Indeed, they are an ideal vehicle for what historian Jay Winter has called the braiding of family history and world history. This lecture will highlight a very few of these letters and their writers, as well as provide a contextual overview. This project has had a long gestation. It first began with my book, Streetwise and Barrie, published in 2001. 75 street names were named for Barrie's First World War dead. While researching those names in the local newspapers, it was immediately apparent just how many letters home were published over the course of the war. The importance of these letters was buttressed during my research for Beautiful Barrie, which entailed reading every extant edition of both the Barrie Examiner and the Northern Advance from 1914 through 1919. In 2014, I began transcribing every war letter. Only actual letters were transcribed, not paraphrased newspaper accounts of letters. The end result is more than 1,000 pages of letters, exceeding 477,000 words. The pages devoted to the newspapers by both papers is remarkably similar. The Examiner devoted the equivalent of 597 pages and the Advance 500, not taking into account missing numbers. On top of organizing the letters, I have developed a biographical index and file. The file is of yet incomplete. At the beginning of the second decade of the 20th century, Barrie was the seat of Simcoe County. It was an administrative, judicial, financial, and commercial center. Essentially a farmer's town, it had a population of around 7,000. As the editor of the Barrie Saturday Morning boasted in 1912, why, there is not another town in the province that has more things to blow about than Barrie. The town is beautifully and conveniently situated, has excellent railway service, contains some of the finest stores north of Toronto, has the best water in the province, an up-to-date sewage system, first-class fire protection, good roads and sidewalks, fine public buildings and churches, a magnificent opera house, beautiful parks, and one of the finest bands in the province. In floriculture, music, and literary pursuit, the town ranks high. We have practically all the conveniences of the cities, and there are dozens of other advantages we might mention. As for the two newspapers, the Northern Advance began publication in 1852. It was the direct successor to the Barrie Magnet, Barrie's first newspaper, founded in 1847. The Advance published until 1940, when it was purchased by the Barrie Examiner. The Examiner itself was founded in 1864. It amalgamated with Barrie Saturday Morning in 1914 through 1939. The Examiner ceased publication in 2017. During World War I, both papers published weekly on Thursdays. The Examiner ran 12 pages in 2 sections and the Advance 8 pages. The Examiner boasted a weekly circulation of over 3,500 copies. Both papers had local correspondence and wide readership in Simcoe County and beyond. In an era before mass communication, local newspapers were the primary source for news, information, and entertainment. They were avid boosters of their respective hometowns and very much saw themselves as one of the key ties that bound up the community. The Northern Advance published the first war-related letter in Barrie on the 8th of August, 1914. It was from Surgeon Major Richard Rakes, who thanked the Women's Auxiliary for providing rations to the first draft of troops who left Barrie for Valcartier. By the 25th of March, 1915, the paper published its first full page of war letters. In the fall of 1916, the Examiner and Saturday Morning began actively soliciting letters for publication. In its edition of 26 October, the Examiner published this item under the heading Soldiers' Letters. Every soldier has his friends at home and tells his story in his own way, so that these letters often throw interesting sidelights on the battles or conditions at the front. The Examiner and Saturday Morning will be pleased to have letters from the front for publication. In supplying such letters to us, recipients are not only doing us a favor, but are furnishing reading that is interesting to thousands of readers who have relatives or friends in khaki. Good care will be taken of the letters, and only such portions as are of general interest will be used. When soldiers have been wounded, their friends are always anxious to learn particulars, and the quickest way to let them know is through the columns of this widely circulated newspaper. Kindly send along the letters, and they will be published as space permits in the order received. The item was repeated verbatim on the 12th of July, 1917. The call worked. Between the 12th of July and 13th September, the paper published 188 letters. On the latter date, the paper noted, "Soldier boy letters are still coming in. Mothers are reading them with a sob in the heart and a shine of gratified pride in the eyes. Brothers and sisters, friends and sweethearts are reading them for the latest news of Bob or Bill." Nor does the interest cease there. Neighbors, strangers even, read them and are proud and pleased and most intensely interested in the most humble details described. It does not matter that they are dated somewhere in France, and other affairs of armament and movements are vague and of such a nature to give no aid, comfort, or information to the enemy. That is as it should be. And for those things, no one of us cares much. The letters may lack literary quality. Not one of us cares for that. Great correspondence litters the front, and the world-famous periodicals are filled with rounded periods, heartthrobs, and the fripperies of fine writing. We read these with pleasure and profit, but no one of them can send us such real pictures of what is going on as we get from the simple, straightforward narratives of the soldier and sailor boys who tell us what they see and feel. They are coming and will come, more and more of them, till the war is over and the last sailor and soldier is home again, safely shielded in the love and admiration of fathers and mothers, friends and sweethearts. And out of them we shall get the true story of the war. History and future will give us the diplomatic exchanges, the orders of emperors and generals, the movement of troops in campaigns and battles, the gains in towns and territories, the losses in men and treasure. But the truest history of the war, our war, will be found in the letters of the soldier boys of Canada, telling what their own clear eyes saw and their own hearts felt as the lines went forward. Very early on, private letters were tapped as a source of public news, information, gossip, and commemoration. They were individual links to a global conflagration that could be made comprehensible only through the experience of the local ones. Moreover, they had the authority of a trusted and known eyewitness. In the early 20th century, the local experience was as profound as it was encompassing. These soldier boy correspondents were not just family. They belonged to churches, lodges, workplaces, neighborhoods, schools, athletic teams, and the community in general. As Jay Winter writes in the first volume of the Cambridge History of the First World War, this attachment to the local and the familiar was utterly transnational. As Wayfarer from Belleville writes in a column published in the Examiner's Women's Realm, to the vast majority, soldiers' letters are very interesting and bring a clearer conception of what this war entails in column after column of printed newspaper. To the world's busy women, the needs of the present war are most forcibly impressed by the written message of somebody's son. The reason of this may be that in the personal touch conveyed in the soldier's letter are revealed the needs of the boys, to which the mother heart in every true woman responds. A lady from Calgary, in speaking of the home paper, said, "When the home paper arrives, I first read all the soldiers' letters, then the news of the old home village." From private letters from the front, even though censored, there comes the clearest glimpse of conditions in the war zone. The poems, the songs, the letters from the boys overseas contain more than the newspaper columns, for in them we feel the emotions, hear the voices, sense the spirit, and touch the life of our Canadian soldiers. Like the later war literature, Acunity's war letters touched on what was communicable and what was not communicable about the war. There is a wide chasm among experience and representation and meaning. What's more, as John Tosh reminds us, this chasm is ever mediated by wider cultural processes that make some discourses hegemonic while marginalizing others. These tectonic forces determine what gets captured in private letters and what does not get into the public press. Typically, war letters have been treated in one of three ways. One party from the home front to the front, from the front home, or both ways, and all usually within a single family unit. There has been no comprehensive community investigation of war letters contemporaneously published in local newspapers, and for good reason. The process is extremely time-consuming and demands a very wide contextual understanding. I began this project in late 2013, worked on it steadily until 2015, in abeyance since then. I have revisited the letters for this lecture. It is almost impossible to overstate the place and importance of these letters for their authors and their recipients. On the 14th of December 1916, the Examiner published a letter written to his mother from a young Barrie soldier who had been in the trenches several months. My dear mother, I have not heard from anybody for 2 or 3 weeks. It must be the fault of the mail people, as I am sure you and others must have written. I hope to hear from you soon. I feel as lost as I feel lost without any mail. You cannot realize what a letter means over here. It is just like a kiss from home. Their importance to the soldiers is undeniable. As St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church Choir Director, Lieutenant J.H. Morgan wrote from somewhere in France on 26 November 1916, whoever said that one of the greatest pleasures the boys at the front look forward to was the coming of the mailbag was perfectly right. Each night, the mail corporal comes into our mess about supper time, and his footstep is a welcome sound. As I told a friend in a letter tonight, one of the consolations of the war is getting news from our friends. Indeed, in one of his last letters home before his death on the 27th of September 1918, at age 20, Private George Bishop wrote to his cousin, Mrs. Roy Hickling, I've been getting along fine considering, but I'm sorry to say I lost one of my best earthly chums here just last week. My friend Kate Jordan was killed. But we have one thing to be thankful for. I often think we are half thankful enough for the mercies we receive every day from God's hand. Though earthly friends leave us, there is always one who never leaves us. There isn't much to be gotten out of this old world anyway, except after it's over. I've been cared for well since I have been here. I can't imagine though when things look blue, how a letter from some loved one helps to brighten one up. On the 31st of January 1918, Cookstown's Corporal Alpine Happy Coos related how we are all growing impatient for the Canadian mail to come when it at last arrived last night. Everybody is happy now. The Canadian mail certainly brings new life to the lads. When it arrives, the cry goes up, good old happy. That's the stuff to give the troops. But when the mail doesn't come, look out. I get as much blame as if I had control of all the mail for the CEF. Perhaps this anonymous soldier put the reception of mail from home most succinctly. All Canadian soldiers like to get lots of mail, as it seems to make the sun shine even when it's raining. This body of letters is indeed a treasure trove. There is much to interest the general public, military historian, as well as intellectual, social, and family historians. That is not to say that they are unimpeachable sources. The problems they pose as authentic historical sources are manifold. Perhaps the greatest and most challenge is that of censorship. War letters published in the contemporary press are quadruple censored. First, they are censored by the author. Who among us writes the complete and unvarnished truth? As former Examiner printing foreman Private Frank L. Patterson writes, the complete and unvarnished writes in a letter to his sister published in the Barrie Examiner and Saturday Morning on the 18th of October, 1917. I am ashamed for not writing sooner, but this life out here takes me in a peculiar way, and somehow I cannot settle down to write, as the everyday occurrences are too monotonous to write about, and the important ones I am not allowed to write of. Then again, the blacker side. Well, we don't talk of that, much less write about it. Secondly, the letters were censored at the front by military officers. Usable military information is hard to come by. Still, there are times it slips through. Third, the letters have been censored by family members. It was they who chose to provide their private correspondence to the newspapers. Barring the discovery of complete caches of letters home, we will never discover what was submitted for publication and what was withheld. And finally, the letters were edited by the newspapers themselves, sometimes for content and often for brevity. Anyone who has written for a newspaper has run afoul of the editor's fabled blue pencil. The tenor and tone of the letters home was early identified. The Examiner's Cookstown correspondent put it succinctly. The trend of the letters appears to be to withhold anything that would worry their people at home and to express their confidence in an early victory over our enemies. Given the theme and the authors, these letters are overwhelmingly male-centric. During an enlistment drive in January 1916, Captain Newton Young noted that the war was a man's game. It is also a game in which the best of fellowship abounds. It is a leveler of all class distinctions. No man with the proper spirit of manhood will now allow another to fight his battles. Contemporaneously published war letters are not the product of memory and myth. They are the very raw material for historical debate and discovery. They are located at what Margaret Higanet has identified as the intersection of the personal and the historical. Another way to conceive of this body of letters is to see them as bridges spanning a great number of dichotomies: battlefront, home front, public, private, personal, public, formality, intimacy, combatant, non-combatant, living, dead, individual, collective, absent, present, forgetting, remembering, secular, sacred. Each of these dichotomies is worthy of a long chapter in a very fat book. Accordingly, there are areas that these letters cannot illuminate. Much is irretrievably lost in the transition from private to public. That said, a close reading of the letters allows for a nuanced understanding of the community's war awareness as it struggled to comprehend the incomprehensible, in aspiring to share what Annette Becker terms as presence in absence. Nonetheless, there are often asides in the letters that escape the blue pen that prove extremely illuminating. Moreover, this body of public contemporaneous war letters can be seen as the kind of community approach to intellectual history envisioned by Clarence Carr over 30 years ago. These letters help us to approach ideas held by a broad range of individuals who are otherwise not remarkable or likely to come to the public's attention. Today's lecture is intended for a general audience. It privileges the words of the authors themselves. Accordingly, I will be quoting them at length while attempting to add some additional context. Barrie's 35th Regiment was among the first to arrive at Valcartier, Quebec. On the 10th of September 1914, the Northern Advance carried this newsy letter from W.S. Robb. Robb would go on to be Barrie's greatest wartime correspondent, contributing 52 letters to the Northern Advance. To the editor, perhaps it would not be out of place to let the citizens of Barrie know how the rank and file of the 35th Regiment are getting on at Valcartier Camp. We are all settled down to camp life properly, and featherbeds will, for quite a while, be only a fond memory. We were moved yesterday into our final brigades. The 35th Regiment was put into the 4th Battalion, 1st Brigade. so we will be the first to move to the front. We had medical examinations on Wednesday. 6 of the 35th failed, 3 coming from Barrie. They mostly failed on eyesight and varicose veins. We were also inoculated with typhoid serum at the same time. We were a sick regiment yesterday and today. We lay off for 2 days and start duty tomorrow. The 35th and Barrie divided between 3 tents. Teddy and Walton and I are in one tent together. We are the only 2 married men left with the Barrie detachment. We have a review of the troops, 30,000 strong on Sunday afternoon before the Duke of Connaught and Sir Robert Borden. As far as I know, 12,000 men sail for Aldershot, England on the 15th September. All the boys are in splendid condition and eager to go to the front. As proof of this, volunteers were asked to go to Bermuda. As there was no chance of seeing fighting down there, not one of the 35th volunteered. We want to go to the front. We have a friendly contempt for the so-called crack city regiments. Personally, as a Scotsman, the 48th from Toronto have not got the big men that I expected to see in a Highland regiment. With the big percentage of old soldiers we have in the 35th, we certainly stand second to none in camp, both physically and for drill. Rob wrote his last letter from Valcartier on the 22nd of September. The camp has taken on an air of gaiety since we got word to move, our only anxiety being that something might happen to keep us back. On the 11th of January 1915, now Staff Sergeant Rob wrote of the trials at Salisbury. We are still under canvas and it is still raining. It is a curious phenomenon, but it always rains here at nights and on Sundays. Rumors are getting thick. Every man is now fully equipped. That we move from here soon is imperative. Even the strongest constitution cannot stand it much longer. In the trenches, the men do get a chance of drying. They get 2 days in the trenches and 1 day off, and I believe they are now working at it, so they will get longer out of the trenches than they do in them. We are continually in the damp here. Now, if you Barrie people want to know what the feeling of the men at large is, it can be summed up in 2 words: fed up. We certainly are. I have heard many of them say that if they had known what was in front of them on the plains, it is at home they would have been now. Though, of course, I believe that was only from the mouth outwards, but it shows that a slight depression is set in. There is only one thing that will put life into us, and that is when the order is given to move. I guess the mention of Salisbury Plains years after this will make us turn pale. The Barrie boys are in fairly good trim. Kind regards to all. The Advance published another Rob letter on the 9th of September, this time on the troop ship heading to France. The rations were strictly of the active service variety, consisting of 1 pound bread or biscuit, mostly biscuits, 1 pound bully beef, 1 pound tin jam between 4 men, about a 1/4 pound of cheese per man, tea and sugar. The only thing we got hot was some tea for breakfast and supper. We had more variety at the firing line. Bully beef tastes good the first time, the second time a bit common, and after that, you have to be mighty hungry to eat your full ration. Nothing happened on the voyage to break the monotony. Private Thomas Higgins, one of the Craighurst boys, told of life in the trenches in a letter published by both papers on the 25th of March, 1915. At present, I am on the firing line. The fighting is very quiet here. That is, as far as attacks are concerned. The snipers are constantly picking at each other and shells are screeching over our heads all the time. Occasionally, while working at our trenches, one of the shrapnels bursts close by, and then you see a scurry for cover. 2 or 3 more follow in rapid succession, just to remind us that we can rest for a few more minutes. Then our artillery replies as a matter of courtesy. Our casualties have been very light so far as I know. My company lost 5 men yesterday, all by snipers. At present, the Prussian Guard are confronting us. This accounts for everyone who shows himself being picked off. Before we came up, the German trenches were occupied by Saxon regiments. The British Tommies tell that they are fine fellows and would rarely resort to sniping. In fact, they say it's quite safe to walk around your trench in view of the Saxons, providing you don't meddle with them. They are the boys that fraternize with the British at Christmas time. Right at this point, they met at friendship between their lines and traded cigarettes and cigars. They readily admit that the Saxons are well fed up with the war. But friendship closes when the Prussian Guards come up to do their turns. Then everyone is out for game. All day long, the snipers' rifles crack on both sides, and the machine gun bark intermittently at anything that presents a target. We've been here since last Sunday. This is Friday, and we hope to get back to our billets again next Sunday for a few days rest. We will appreciate it, for we need it. I have had no sleep for 2 nights. The sun is getting warmer now, so I think I will try to avail myself of a few minutes repose before the cold of evening comes on. Sometimes it is so cold at night that we cannot sleep when we get a chance. The grim realities of warfare became manifest by 1917. Harold Gill writes on the 25th of January, "The present life is the most exciting of all. Nevertheless, when the next war comes along, I'll seriously consider being a fireside critic. A great many of us have this thought, but I'll wager that nearly every man would join up again if needed. I hope to see Germany's downfall, and I have an idea that is not so far away. I am in my glory when we are pounding old Fritz to bits. He killed one of my best chums a short time ago. I am glad I joined the artillery. After seeing and experiencing real war, I would not trade my job for any officers in the infantry." He would soon be wounded and hospitalized in Liverpool. 2 weeks later, the Examiner carried this from Private W. Pattenden, who wrote from somewhere in France. "The saying war is hell is true enough, but I like it better every day. You would laugh if you could have seen the 3 of us. We were so cold that we didn't know what to do. I had a little tin, and we put some oxo in it and lit a candle underneath it, and then put in 3 blocks of oxo in the water, and we had a drink. We had to shave with only about a cup of water, and when we got out our shaving brushes, they were frozen stiff like a piece of wood. But after telling each other what fools we were for leaving home, we began to get a lather. Then the razors struck our faces. But talk about fun. We have it sometimes. I would not be back in civilian life for the world. Well, I am sure glad I am here. I would sooner die here than be a slacker in the old burg. I was yellow once, just before I enlisted, but as soon as I put my name down, I didn't care how soon I went to the front. And now I have no more fear than when I went to kill a chicken at home." Earlier in the year, Lieutenant Colonel D.H. McLaren, also writing from somewhere in France, mused, "Last night in one of the trenches, the mud and water was pretty deep, and I turned on a flashlight, carefully pointed it to the ground, only for half a minute, when a rifle bullet whizzed by me and a rifle report sounded in my rear. The most wonderful thing in this war is the number of bullets that do not hit you." Private Hugh MacArthur, writing to his sister, also spoke of Mrs. "Dear sister, just a few lines to let you know that I am living and well. I think the war will finish this summer. It's a great experience, this war. I would not have missed it for anything. Fritz pretty nearly got me with a bullet one night. He tore my overcoat pocket. It was close enough, but a miss is as good as a mile here. Wonderful how a fellow escapes at all sometimes." In the aftermath of the big push of August 1918, Private W.C. Lockhart shared one of his close calls. It surely is a marvel how a fellow can get through and not get hit. I had a few narrow escapes. There were two of us standing in the trench, and a shell, which neither of us heard coming, struck the parapet and exploded, knocking us both down. The other fellow just got a little piece in his back, enough to get him out of the lines. I think all that saved me was my tin lid as the piece struck off and glanced away. It sure has been some glorious affair since the start, and I'm more proud than ever to be called a Canadian. Unhappily, it was not all near misses. There are many letters written from aid stations and hospital beds. Safely in England on the 14th of March, 1917, where he was recovering from 7 wounds, shoeing smith John C. Lang wrote to his parents, "I am still in hospital with my wounds, but when we are in hospital here in England, we are not tied down like we were over in France and can have a good time if we do not be foolish and get unruly with the sisters. But if one does, she is after him all the time for something or other. I am not likely to die yet for a while. That is, if I do not have to go back to France. Over there, you can expect to die anytime. For just as soon as a shell comes with your mark on it, you get it, and good and hard too, I tell you. Some of the fellows are glad to get it so they can come over to England, but there are a lot that never get back, more than you hear about. They are gone, and that is all anyone knows of them. I have seen a lot over there. I saw a shell come in on 5 men, and that 5 never were seen again and never will be. That is the best way to get it. You only get it once, and you know nothing about it, and you do not have time to think of anyone you are leaving behind you." Well, I must stop this kind of talk, as it makes me think of some things I have seen over there and may tell you about when I get home. Just now, I hate to think about them. I cannot tell you much about it, as they are on the lookout for anything we say about these things. But when I get home, I can tell you. Do not worry, because I am hospital. I will soon be out, and after I get home, you will see why I have been here. I may be able to do more by having some little things done to the wound, but as it is, I have a hard job to walk, as there is a piece of shell in my leg right on my knee. Private F.R. Pearson shared his hospital experience in March 1918. "It is quite a long time since I got wounded now, and I am walking around on crutches, so time passes very well. You know, a bullet makes quite a mess of one's leg when it hits the bone squarely, and I will always be a little lame. But even at that, it might have been worse. Sometimes when I read about the coming battles on the front, as I stretch out my leg and measure it alongside the good one, and almost wish it was all right so I could go back and help fight the battles which will take place, then one thinks of the muddy trenches and smoky dugouts, and the crawling brutes that used to make our lives one long misery, and the long marches in nighttime with the cold rain beating down. I pat that leg of mine and say, it is a fine leg." Returning to the front, views on the enemy hardened over time. The Northern Advance published this letter from Lieutenant Corporal James S. Meehan to friends in Beaton on the 13th of May, 1915. "Do not think for a moment by these expressions that I am underestimating the fighting qualities of our enemies, or that we are fighting a race who are holding on by their toenails only. These ideals would be fallacious were I to permit them to gain credence. I want to establish that the idea that we are not fighting a cowardly line of Huns bulldozed into fighting. The Germans are brave, and as far as I can learn, this has been proved on many occasions. I have also observed in the official version of fierce engagements a reference being made to this particular trait. They may not be honorable if reports are true. This sniping business is an instant in point, but I scarcely think that they can be charged with cowardice. They realize that they are fighting a losing game and are hanging on with a pertinacity that can scarcely be equaled. Well, We are all good so far, and the rest does seem good, though one has to exercise such care. If he doesn't, he is reminded that he is cited in no uncertain fashion, and then duck and smile, bless you, smile. We all smile, in fact. We are all optimists, for we know the success of the Allies. Germany cannot win this war. Grudging praise wore away as hostilities dragged on and the butcher's bill rose. A wounded private C.A. Furman of Allendale wrote from his English hospital bed in late 1916 or early 1917. When morning came, we were shown where our front extended, and at 12:35 we were to advance. It was about a mile to go. I had a breakfast of bully beef and hardtack, and about 12 o'clock they dished out some rum. It's the real dope. We were all feeling good, so along comes 12:35, and the order came down to advance, so over we went. Fritz had a machine gun going right in front of me, but he missed me. My comrades were falling just like hail, and you could not hear yourself speak. Some of those poor fellows had legs blown off and their heads off. Oh, it was hell. We could not stop to help them. We had to keep going. When I got near the German trench, a Hun threw a bomb at me, but it did not explode. Lucky for me that it didn't. And I jumped into the trench and shot 3 of them. As soon as we got in, they all put their hands up and cried, "Mercy, comrade." We didn't have any mercy. We killed them all, cleaned out that trench, and on we went. I just got near their supports when a shell exploded right in front of me, and I did not know anymore till I woke up at the dressing station, feeling pretty tough. I had nothing on me but my kilt and puttees and boots. I was in an awful state and thought I was going to kick the bucket. Well, I guess that's all for this time. Give my love to the kiddies, and thanks very much for the cigarettes. The doctor says I will make Canada. That is luck. Gunner F.J. Clayton was even more direct in his letters to his mother on August 11, 1918, just after Amiens. No doubt you are worried to death about not receiving any news from me lately, but I could not help it as the mail has not been going out. I enclose you a snapshot of a guy, German, that I just put a bag over. He got too cheeky. I found the picture in his pocket. He was a rather nice looking fellow, wasn't he? Well, Mother, I do not know when I will get a chance to post this, but I'm writing it so it will be ready. Very few of the letters published in the Barrie papers mention about actually killing the enemy. Conscription was a major political fracture point in Canada. The volunteer boys at the front had their own views. In July 1917, Private Percy Spring wrote, "Just a few lines this Saturday evening to let you know I am fine and happy. I have been away nearly 10 months from home, and I am as happy as if I were in old Canada. I have never been the least bit lonesome or downhearted as I keep looking on the bright side of life. I am out here only doing my duty as the rest of the brave Canadians. I am here with a bunch of fellows I have known for a long time, and some I have known all my life. We always have some joke to crack which keeps us all in good heart. I suppose you people hear a great deal about this country and the hardships, but we are all feeling fine and looking fine, and the boys tell me I am getting fatter than ever. All the boys here are fine so far, and I have been very lucky. However, we may have a change of luck, but we all hope for the best. We have some good times over here. Of course, there are only ourselves to make it, but we are never lonesome, and we always find something to smile at. Sometimes it's not much either. Sometimes I think of the good times I have missed, but I'm not the only one who has missed them, and I think I will enjoy myself for being over here much better than I had stayed home and been a slacker. I sure would like to hear of conscription, as there are lots of fellows over there that should be in the army, and I would like to see some of them over here. They wouldn't be so stuck on themselves. We see lots of air fights and all kinds of fights. We find over here that the Canadians all have a feeling for Canadians, and we are just the same as if we had known each other for years. Near misses, wounds, illness, death. These are the grim realities of war. Many letters of condolence were published in both papers. This one, dated the 4th of April 19, will have to stand in for them all. Dear Mrs. McLean, this is just a note from the officers of the 4th Battalion to express our sorrow in the death of your son, which occurred a short time ago when we were in the line. Our sincerest sympathy goes to you, his mother, and also the other dear ones left behind. This is a cruel war, and those at home, unfortunately, have to suffer most. Private McLean was in the number 4 platoon, and I am in charge of number 3. At the time of his death, however, I was close by and managed to see exactly what happened. We had just taken over the support line, and as the boys were getting settled down, we became subjected to considerable shelling. A chum of your son's, Burns, was hit in the head, and your son immediately went to his aid. It was only a slight wound, but I sent a stretcher Barrie along to help him out. Then, thinking everything was all right, I went farther down the trench. Within a very short time, another shell dropped right in their midst, and all of them were instantly killed. It was a very sad incident, one of the saddest I'd seen, when a chum who was binding up a wounded pal was killed. It certainly upset all of us much to lose 3 of our boys, 3 of the very best, in the opinion of all of the officers of the company. Your son deserves more credit than all, for he, of his own free will, gave up his life binding up a wounded man. We are very proud of him. He was a real soldier over here, full of enterprise and ambition. In my opinion, he was about to be a very promising NCO, the kind we need over here. He was always on the job and was at all times well liked by all the boys. I'm sure you must feel very badly about it, and I can assure you, you have my deepest sympathy. I have a mother of my own, and I know full well how she feels with regards to this war. Mothers are the ones who have the hardest battles to fight. We out here take it all with a smile that a mother can't do. Your son was buried 5 miles behind the lines in a little town called Vagatin. I wasn't present, as I was still on the line at the time, but the funeral was very impressive and with full military honors. We are all very proud of your son's sacrifice and yours too, and we hope the future for you will be brighter than the past. One of the most numerous categories of letters home are letters of thanks for receipt of field comforts. They're also known as sock letters. This is one feature of the correspondence that highlights the critical role played by women on the home front. In 1917, the Barrie branch of the Red Cross stood 8th in the whole list of cities and towns in Canada, irrespective of population, in the amount of receipts and money spent on supplies for work. Indeed, during the war, the Barrie Field Comforts knitted 27,154 pairs of socks for the boys. The Northern Advance published this letter under the heading, "Send Socks to Soldiers," on the 9th of March, 1916. If the women at home are sending anything, for goodness sake, send socks. They could never send too many if they sent nothing else. You cannot get any good socks in France, and if they could, they are 80 cents a pair. We walk 10 or 12 miles a day, and the life of socks cannot be judged by home use. A bad heel may lay up a man just when he is needed most. Parcels were eagerly sought after and gratefully accepted, but the disappointment when items were damaged was palpable. As Private Douglas Aiken, who went overseas with the 157th Battalion, wrote his mother from France in August of 1917. I'm still on night shift, but tomorrow night is my last night unless they decide me on all the time. I hope they do it, for I like it fine. It has been lovely weather up till now, and it started to rain. It's been raining ever since. I got a parcel the other day, at least what was left of it. The only thing that was any good was the socks, also cigars, OXO, and gum. The cakes were all in powder, and the fruit cake must have been in a damp place, for it was moldy. and I had to throw it out. They should be packed in a tin box to stand the rough handling they get between Canada and here, as it's a long way. The best part of any war is its end, and a number of letters appeared in the papers following the armistice. A Thornton soldier wrote this letter home from Bonn, Germany on the 28th of December, 1918. To reach Germany took us the best part of the month from the time we left Mons, where the last battle was fought. I'm sending you a couple of souvenir cards of Germany, as I have no other souvenirs to send or to give. One could write a book on the things that have happened over here, things that one has seen himself, and people would call him a liar. So I don't pretend to say much about it, but what I have seen or what has happened to me, nor will I ever. I want to forget it, and I am like a good many more boys, absolutely fed up with war. I most sincerely hope that we won't be here very long, but they tell us to pack up as we are on our way to God's country. As I have now traveled some countries, but none like Canada, believe me. These countries might be all right to tour through in motors or trains, but I have seen nothing to write home about in my travels. I have heard lots of rumors about when we are to return, but I shall believe none until they actually tell us to get ready to leave Germany, which I hope will be sometime in January or the 1st or February. Anyway, I am most thankful that it is all over, and I'm sure everybody else is too. So many letters, so many words. There is no single or simple way to approach the letters written home and published in the local newspapers during the First World War. Each experience is unique, as are motivations and perspectives. Two things are for sure. These letters are a treasure trove for those seeking to understand how individuals and their community came to grips with the cataclysmic forces that the war engendered and released. Secondly, these letters, their authors and their recipients must be treated with utmost care and respect. They are the voices of experience of lives lived and lives lost. On that note, I will conclude today's talk with the wisdom of Cookstown's Alpine Happy Coos. On Easter Sunday, 1917, just before the Big Vimy push, he wrote, "My dear mother, for once I have to say I had to delay in writing this letter. The fruits of war are most terrible indeed." Following the great Canadian victory, he wrote on April the 16th, "I am extremely thankful to say that I am still alive, safe and sound again. I have been spared also through this period of the great push. I tell you, after all, a whole hide is the best souvenir." Thank you very much.
So now we'll open the question and answer period. Is there anybody that has any questions? We have an applause from Daniel Byers. Gave you applause.
Thanks, Dan.
And a question? Yep.
Sorry. Also just realized I can put my camera on. I think it was either Ellen or Elizabeth who was actually applauding first, and I realized I could do it. So, and I'll say hi to Ellen and Elizabeth as well. I guess there's so many things that you raised that could comment on, but I guess one thing that struck me was, making the connection to all the, that it does actually tell us a lot of things that would be of interest to scholarly historians, but also just that there aren't that many sources that actually are memoirs are written after the time from memory, and there are letters and diaries, but there's not that many that have done what you've done, where you've actually put together for a whole community, and it is very much of the time. It's not censored through people's memories of the war after. So it's fascinating just to see some of the things that some of the things you've noted very much confirm a lot of the as conclusions we've made about what the war was and how it affected people, but other ones raise questions. And it's more of a comment, but I think Brad was maybe wanting to comment on that, so I'll stop talking.
Oh, well, did you have a question, Dan? I mean, that's part of what fascinates me about these letters is, as you're well aware, there's a great deal of historiography, and I didn't want to get that into that today. I didn't have enough time as it was, but so much about memory and myth, you know, going right back to Fusel, and I think it's really important to have these voices speak for themselves in the moment. And as you say, I mean, there's a great letter, as you know, about the good old Canadian boots made of cardboard. Sergeant Robb was a shoemaker by trade, and I didn't include the letter, but he goes on and on and on about, you know, hang on to those Canadian boots like death, grim death, because all we have to do is resole them, and they're way better than the British issue. And the same thing with some of the stories about the Ross rifle. So there's about equipment, there's tactics, there's a whole realm of areas that, I mean, you can't do it in 45 minutes. So, I mean, that was the biggest challenge in today's project, was to try and put the letters in some context and share a broad sense of them. But ideally, these letters will raise more questions than they'll answer.
I always think that's a sign of a good lecture when it is thought-provoking, when it has more questions and it elicits more questions. That I think that is a success. That would be a degree of success or a marker of success. I also want to point out, Brad, that you are the only lecturer I've had so far that got technically a standing ovation virtually through effects. So I guess pat yourself on the back for that.
It helps having friends watch.
Ellen, did you have a question?
I do. And it makes sense, of course, that the letters would be male-centric. But Brad, were there any written by any of the nursing sisters?
There are a couple very early on. There was a nursing sister named Hamill, and she wrote an early letter, but very few letters from the nursing sisters. I think she'd be the only one. Hard to believe. Why that is, I can't say. But what we did get, some of the women who were involved in field comforts, Mrs. Stewart and Mrs. Plummer in Great Britain, they wrote a number of letters. This is what we need. This is what we're doing. But they're more related to the field comforts aspect of it, which is huge. I mean, I didn't go through and count the number of letters, what I call sock letters, but they're a very large proportion of the war letters, and they were used as much to support the troops as also engage the home front. So that's a whole area that deserves a whole lot more scrutiny. But sad to say, the nursing sisters, no, just the one letter, I think, from Nurse ML. There's a couple letters early on.
Alrighty, thank you. And if I may, a quick hello and shout out to Dan and Elizabeth.
And actually, just to follow up on Ellen's question, when you mentioned Plummer, like, I've heard of the Canadian Field Comforts Commission. Was she actually from Barrie, or was it more just that it happened to be a letter that?
There's actually a Barrie connection. There's somebody's related to somebody, so I'd have to go back and take a closer look at it. But they were somebody's sister or sister-in-law, so there was a very close connection. And so there are a number of letters directly from her that were published in the paper. But yeah, she was, I believe she had the rank of captain and looked after the distribution of Canadian field comforts in England. So she's a fascinating lady in her own right.
and I know because there was a historian who was working on this and happened to run across it. She and there was a lieutenant, and you probably saw her name. I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but Sam Hughes commissioned them, even though they weren't supposed to actually ever be women who had commissions directly in the Canadian Army, but they got away with it because Sam Hughes ordered it to happen. So they were the only two women who were not commissioned as nursing sisters, but directly as officers in the Canadian Army. So.
Okay, well, I wasn't aware of that, so we will have to chat about that.
Yeah. And I don't want to monopolize, but the other, I guess that in addition to all the issues you had talked about analyzing the levels of censorship, it kind of caught me when you said that both newspapers sometimes publish the same letters. And I also kind of realized when you said like they were calling for letters, there's maybe also another level where like it sounds like this was just nice, convenient, cheap content for the newspaper that they didn't have to produce themselves.
Well, not only that, it did boost circulation. I mean, people actively searched these letters out. And just like Wayfarer said from Belleville, you know, the first thing I turn to are the war letters. So yeah, they're not only cheap content, but they also sold newspapers. So there is that element to it. It wasn't all just public service, but I would say that would be the overriding concern. But certainly, think about it. When the Barrie Advance devotes one full page of a number, that's 1 out of 8 pages. That's what, 12.5%? You know, like that's a lot of coverage, and people never tired of it right through the war. Like I said, there's over 2,600 of them.
And I'll make one more comment that but just following up on what you said, because the other thing is, again, as I'm sure several of the people who are participating are aware, like, you know, this is part of history, is analyzing every document, because, you know, that's one of the debates, as Brad is aware, that have been for a long time, is it was assumed soldiers didn't talk about the horrors overseas, although some of the things you quoted were very direct and open. But yet on the same level, then you start wondering, okay, but did the newspapers maybe play that up? Or, you know, not necessarily that the letter writers were doing it so they could have their letters published, but were soldiers maybe playing up certain aspects that they expected people to want to hear about? And there's all different levels of analysis, you know, getting into but.
Well, I can say there was one letter that kind of made the penultimate cut and didn't get in. But the soldier actually says to his family member, please don't publish this letter in the local papers. I don't want to be seen as being a hero. I'm no different than anyone else. So I don't imagine that they were playing up. Like, first of all, it's the letters are not that imperial blood and thunder and gore. That's not the tenor of the letters. And just like there are very few letters that actually speak of actually killing the enemy, very few. That kind of detail isn't there. So you have to read a lot of letters to get, you know, they were falling to the left of me and the right of me. And that, first of all, they didn't want to worry their family members. So if anything, those experiences are downplayed. Just like one of the soldiers says, I just want to forget about it. I'm not going to talk about it. And I won't even talk about it when I get home. So there was a lot of active forgetting, even in the moment. So you can see how that becomes a problem when you have retrospective pieces done after the war.
I just wanted to make a comment. I was surprised how little some of them were censored, to be honest. I anticipated them being a bit more censored than what they were. So I found that really interesting, how much detail they were allowed to give.
There's one letter I wish I could have read at length, but it would have taken half my time. In the early part of the war, censorship was uneven. So earlier stuff slipped in that might not. Then when big pushes were on and the volumes of letters were getting heavier, I mean, it was some poor, probably a junior lieutenant at the front that was in charge of censoring this stuff. And you got a great big basket of it among all your other duties. So you're tired, you're cold, you're hungry, and you got a basket of this, plus you got to look after your men. So there's times things did slip through, but keep in mind, they are heavily censored. There is no doubt about that. And I'm very upfront about that. But then, you know, define for me a truly authentic experience. They're all mediated.
If I may, I put my reference services hat on, and Mary Plummer's mother was Annie McConkey, a daughter of the late Sheriff Thomas McConkey of Barrie.
Thank you, Ellen.
So there's the local connection.
Perfect, thank you. I didn't have my computer, but I knew there were connections, and that was something that was amazing. You would be surprised. Again, people think in terms of local, but the connections that were out and about from Barrie across Canada and into Europe, and especially into Great Britain, they actually are surprising. And one of the features I didn't have room for, some of the longest letters, and that's why I couldn't include them, were actually the letters about, hey, mom and dad, let me tell you about my leave. I mean, there's one gentleman, he has an 8,000 word letter on his leave into England and Scotland and London, and they go into great detail. And then, you know, who they're meeting, you know, they're meeting royalty. One guy met the Pope. So the connections get really diffuse, and they're kind of fun to see. You could really have a lot of fun about the letters on leave. You really, really could. One little story that's kind of fun is, of course, rationing was really, really strict in Great Britain. And of course, these boys are getting all these parcels. So one of the soldiers goes, you know, it's really, really great to be on leave in London and pull a big chunk of sugar out of your pocket and just pull it out and unwrap it carefully in front of all the rest of the restaurant patrons, and then pop it into your tea. And he goes something to the effect that, you know, at that point, that little lump of sugar could be, you know, a 1 pound note wouldn't have bought that sugar. So there's those kinds of stories that really come out on leave, and they are some very detailed letters. Life in Bombay, life in Gibraltar. One of the Barrie soldiers was in the first ambulance that went into Jerusalem with Allenby. So those kinds of experiences are there, and they're utterly fascinating. And as Dan says, they just keep raising questions that professional historians have been interested in for many years.
Well, thank you, Brad. I really think that this was a very informative and insightful presentation. It's really nice to hear from them, like from their own words, kind of what the experiences were. And it sounds like there's a lot more there that you didn't even kind of explore tonight or today. I mean, sorry, but I really,
Absolutely.
yeah, I really do appreciate you joining us today and giving your lecture. It was wonderful. As I said, you're the only one that got a virtual standing ovation. So I assume it's actually a seated ovation, because I don't know if they in fact stood up. But in my mind, I like to imagine that they stood up and they all clapped for you.
Very kind of you.
But thank you very much.
You're welcome. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And oh, Cheryl, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to say it was really great. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Cheryl. And I will, as I said, this has been recorded, so this will be posted on the website, I hope, probably within a week. Okay. So thank you once again on behalf of myself and the Simcoe County Museum. Thank you, Brad, for joining us today. It was a wonderful lecture. Thank you very much.
Great
My
job.
pleasure. Thanks, guys. See you soon.